Casa Laura's house. We float above a sea of almond trees, whose broad leaves burn ember red, above a sea of endless wind and turquoise water shimmering with fish and sun, above reefs and ancient civilizations ground to white powder for our descending feet, above the floor of the first morning light, above the jungle's roots, the jaguar's paws, and the other life we have for a winter's time left behind. La Sinfonia del Dia, the Symphony of the Day. The day's aviary orchestra starts tuning. Mexico's version of a mourning dove practices wood hollow notes. Like Indian calls, 3 peeps are pronounced on a piccolo. 2 octaves of oboe sound in the rear branches, one high, another much more so. A short scree of the violin bow over in the string section, fingers sliding up the chin. A little more mourning dove, a few piano plinks in the keys of F and G, then great silence as the sun takes his place at the podium, shines his eyes on the musicians ready on their wings, and over the great hall, and begins to conduct the grand concerto of the day. The morning sea. The morning sea is all mercury and molten marble, undulating beyond a break of coral cliff, a frame of glass, and fringe of sun-dried palm. Debajo de mar en calma, under the calm sea. Underwater lies a luminous world where strands of light waver through the green glossiness, where your skin softens and glows, and all your limbs move slowly as in a dream. Below the surface, tender currents caress your body. Above, a warm breath plays on your neck and face as you sweep half-open eyes over the floating landscape. The mise en scène at Lafitte, 01. A white-clapboard boat with barn-red trim is tied up by the shore, where soft cymbal clashes of sea, sound, and sound. A coterie of clouds lie mostly low along the wide horizon, a horizon with color that deepens as the ocean telescopes in, from midnight blue, almost black, to pale green marble, all cake-frosted at this hour. The sand is so fine and warm beyond the circle of shade we share, where we sit together and read, you the salty tale of Ahab's wife, me these lines lapping onto the page. Our palapa is a little leaning tower of Pisa, or straw umbrella planted and fluttering at the fringes, like the fledgling palms with their dreams of distant treedom and clusters of creamy coconuts and yellow birds perching on their shoulders to sing to the sunrise and sunset. A bleached white bungalow sits on either side of our cool feathered nest. The walls soak in sun as we catch the constant breeze. The scene is totally serene, the mood mellow. All clocks have stopped or unwound, and all cares have dissolved in the soft, purifying air of the idle afternoon. Buenas noches y bienvenidos. Good evening or morning or afternoon if you're elsewhere in the world right now. And welcome, senors y senoras, senoritas. Thank you for coming to lean in to this 35th floating poetry broadcast in the weekly series. Our adventures continue and are coming to you live again from the salty and tonight snow-swept coastline of New England, here from Watch Hill, Rhode Island by the sea of serendipity. This is your poet and poetorialist, Colin Goedecke, inviting you this week, esta semana, south of the border, to immerse con gusto in Mexico, Mejico, especially the Yucatan and the Costa Maya, where I spent much time over many years. Last week, we voyaged to France, if you were along, and the Francosphere, the week before to Greece, to the Grecosphere, and next week, on the cusp of Christmas time, into the season and theme of winter. So, I've fashioned for us a fiesta of observations, evocations, and versifications, poetry on the people, culture, and spirit of Mexico, country of vibrant color, flavor, faces, histories, myths, music, landscapes, and more. And for some of you there, and for me, a splash of tequila reposado at the ready. Vámonos. As I did a fancy free association, what sprang to mind were chilies, tequilas, cervezas, sombreros, and mañanas, for starters, anyway. When you, from Savor, it says, when you think of Mexican chilies, you first conjure up the fresh, spicy green kinds, jalapenos, serranos, and poblanos. But in our cookbook, Nopalito, we make the case for why dried chilies, which often occupy an entire wall of Mexican markets, are the cuisine's true workhorses. Fresh peppers are great for adding color, crunch, and heat to a dish, but it's the dried versions that offer the most surprising and complex flavors, from smoky to spicy to citrusy, chocolatey, earthy, and mushroomy, from punishingly spicy to sweet and pruny, and the colors from bright orangey red to deep purple black. Aren't they beautiful? I liked the diversivore.com explanation of the Holy Trinity, they called it. Three particular dark, sweet, and relatively mild chilies that hold a place of particular prominence in Mexican cooking, especially when it comes to their use in the famous mole sauces of the region, often referred to as the Holy Trinity of Mexican chilies, feature prominently in many dishes, and you may know them. One is the ancho chili, often given a starring role, and the mulatto, which I'm less familiar with, as many of us may be. Very distinctive chocolatey cherry licorice notes, extremely popular in Mexico, but not as well known outside the country. And the pasilla, a dried ripe chilaca pepper, similar to that of an ancho, with raisin and coffee notes. So there's a little spice note there for us to begin our entries into Mexico. Tequila. The origins date back to 250 A.D., when the Aztec Indians first fermented the juice of the agave to produce their ceremonial wine, which was pulque. Plenty of evidence archaeologically that it was important in the lives and cultures of the Mexican Indians, revered the plant as a deity. And in 1519, when the conquistadors invaded, Cortez's soldiers did not appreciate those fermented agave drinks, so they experimented to make wine from the native plants and discovered that the fermented agave could be distilled to produce what they called vino de mezcal, which was mezcal wine. Well, we know that that's the origin of mezcal, which was essentially cooked, the agave. And so they came and brought copper stills and distillation, and that's how things began with tequila. It actually, in the local Nahuatl language, it means, quote, volcanic rock or rock that cuts, which referred to the dormant volcano that shadows the town of Tequila. We've maybe had our shares of cold cervezas in Mexico and outside of it, and the Spaniards were the first to brew beers in Mexico using barley and wheat. After Mexico's War of Independence, production began to flourish, and German immigrants brought more knowledge and expertise to the table there, and subsequently 2 big Mexican breweries. I didn't know that for a long time. They, by the turn of the 21st century, controlled 90% of the beer market. And so even though the brands were different, they were all owned by the same companies who ultimately sold out to the big international conglomerates. And now, like in other parts of the world, in the United States and elsewhere, there's a boom coming back in artisanal beer. So that's very encouraging. In Mexican slang Spanish, by the way, the larger bottles of beer are called caguamas, sea turtles, or if you're in northeastern Mexico, you might hear them referred to as balenas, whales. Specifically in Mazatlan, that refers to the Pacifico brand. I actually like that one, sold in larger sized bottles. A poem of mine from the Yucatan from '98, Margarita, for that lovely cocktail. The salty bite of your lip is a surprise, like kissing a mermaid. Then the taste of your tart sweet body on the tongue, and a rush of lightness. Then swallowing you, then wanting more. Margarita. I've had my share. Another poem from me. Here they call it limon. The lime is more than sublime in your cold cerveza and salt spackled margarita. Under the equator, it's a welcome wedge to jolly jactars long at sea and turbaned havildars making G&Ts for their sahibs. It's the key to a famous Florida pie no lemon could ever be, and without this tart fruit, there'd be no lime green leisure suit. I call it limon. We talked about different attitudinal aspects of other countries, sprezzatura in Italy, je ne sais quoi, etc. in France, and so you know that we're going to speak about mañana, which in Mexico is sometimes referred to as the land of mañana. By now we know, according to MexConnect, that the word also means in the morning. When the man we're waiting for doesn't show up, the workman, we start to wonder, did he mean mañana tomorrow or en la mañana, some morning of some mañana? We're learning that Mexican society operates within its own time frame, leaves time for socializing and attending to personal affairs, gives priority to living rather than working. It also produces a word, momentito. The accompanying hand signal given with the first finger and thumb indicates a small delay. The actual wait can stretch almost to infinity. Always carry a good book. Attempting to understand the origins of what an unkind observer might call a pattern of deception, deliberate or otherwise, is difficult. One possible reason is that Mexicans are a very kind and polite people. They seek to please. Thus, the tradesman who can't supply a service promptly seeks to reassure rather than upset by a flat-out, it's not possible until. What he really is saying is, don't worry, the job will get done. He may be somewhat less than candid, but he is certainly not being malicious, so don't hold your breath. Mexicans have learned to bury their anger and impatience. They laugh, sing, and smile, hiding their frustrations. They live for today. Let others worry about mañana. I'm going to focus more in on the Yucatan. That's my experiences, but a little more on Mexico itself. Lonely Planet says, welcome to Mexico, palm-fringed beaches, chili-spiced cuisine, steamy jungles, teeming cities, fiesta fireworks, Frida's angst. Mexico conjures up diverse, vivid dreams, and the reality lives up to them. And I thought this part was good because on the people themselves, at the heart of your experience in Mexico will be the people, a super diverse crew from Mexico City hipsters to shy indigenous villagers of Chiapas. They're renowned for their love of color and frequent fiestas, but they're also philosophical folk to whom timetables are less important than simpatía, empathy. You rarely find Mexicans less than courteous. They're more often positively charming and know how to please guests. They might despair of ever being well-governed, but they're fiercely proud of Mexico. They're one-of-a-kind homeland with all its variety, tight-knit family networks, beautiful, ugly cities, deep-rooted traditions, and agave-based liquors. Well, my experience bears that out, maybe yours too. There were some surprising facts that I came across, just a couple of them. Like Venice, Mexico City is sinking, slowly sinking to the depths of the oceans like Atlantis. Well, at a rate of 10 inches a year, as the city pumps draw water from the lake that supports it. So it's lost its title as the seventh highest capital city to Yemen, now sits at number 8. It was the birthplace of North American print. Long before phones and the internet became commonplace, it was the place to find your literature in North America. In 1539, Mexico City was the first place in all of North America to use the printing press. The house is still there that houses it. And it's the oldest city in North America, not St. Augustine. It was founded in 1521, built by the Spaniards on the ruins of an Aztec city. I had this experience in the Yucatan at the bar, talking with one of the lovely bartenders who I'd gotten to know over the years that I was continuing to go back to the same little hotel on the coast, no town, by itself, same hotel room year after year, very happy. And I said something about being the United States, and he said, well, that's where I'm from. And because Mexico's real name is the United States of Mexico, Estados Unidos Mexicanos. Country is divided into 31 states plus the federal district. How about that? Each with its own laws, regulations, police, similar to our United States of America. Yeah, so we learn as we go, eh? Food, of course, but we've had all our own experiences, but I thought I'd just call out a couple of the sort of crazy things that I'd never heard about, haven't eaten yet, and I doubt that I will be brave enough to. But one of them in Oaxaca is the chapulines, or grasshoppers, typically fried in garlic, chili, and lime. Well, the thought may make your stomach turn, but it's a surprising aspect that a number of tourists rapidly acquire a taste for them. So, are they addictive? Who knows? How about flying ant salsa? Flying ant salsa, a traditional delicacy also in Oaxaca. Every spring after the first rains, flying ants, or chicatanas, swarm the city. Locals catch them and use them to make a variety of foods, including a spicy, garlic-heavy salsa. Apparently highly nutritious, and even children love to catch them. So, okay, maybe you'll try. I don't think I'm going to get there, but I mentioned in the beginning about the hats, sombreros, and I thought you'd like to know that they were created out of necessity in the early history of the Mexican culture because of the strong sun. No surprise if you've been there, it's pretty blazing. And it began during the 17th century, and Mexican natives and immigrants soon started building hats with wider and wider brims, and those hats quickly became an iconic clothing accessory for the whole nation. It's not just the mariachis who wear them, which we might believe, but it's which are sort of almost comical in their way. It's a stereotype, and yes, they do wear them, and they're pretty gaudy and what have you, but beautiful. The history is rich and significant, and it's an important part of Mexican culture, and it's practical and functional, and it actually comes from the Spanish word sombra, meaning shade. It's not just a straw that was used originally for them, but felt, and it distinguished the cheapest ones were made of straw worn by farmers and peasants, and felt and sometimes velvet were worn by the upper classes and often decorated. So it was also a sign of some kind of status. Well, beyond all that, of course, we have some interesting artists to reference tonight. Diego Rivera, no surprise, whose full name was, by the way, Diego María de la Concepción Juan Nepomuceno Estanislao de la Rivera y Barrientos Acosta y Rodriguez, also known as Diego Rivera. Imagine if he had to introduce himself every single time that way. Well, he was married. His fourth wife was artist Frida Kahlo, and he certainly had a volatile relationship. If you never saw the film, it's quite marvelous, Frida. And that continued until her death. He married later on a fifth time to his agent. And he's known for his, murals and starting off something big in that way as an artist. And I like the story about, if you don't know it, and we New Yorkers, some of us may know it, is that he was commissioned in 1932 to do a mural in the middle of Manhattan's Rockefeller Center. And some wondered whether the tycoon John D. Rockefeller Jr. knew what he was getting into in 34, because in 34, that artist's work was chiseled off the wall. Well, the family was aware of his leftist politics when it commissioned the work. He was asked to show a man at the crossroads, looking with uncertainty but with hope and high vision to the choosing of a course leading to a new and better future. And the theme of the center was, quote, new frontiers. So that was a very spiritual way of looking at development of art. Well, needless to say, the original sketch for the mural, what he agreed to paint, included three men clasping hands in the middle, a soldier, worker, and peasant, spiritual union of all three that Rivera thought humanity was composed of. He was provoked, however, in New York by leftist groups and communist groups that challenged him for painting for Rockefeller. So when the headline came out in the World Telegram, Rivera paints scenes of communist activity and John D. Jr. foots the bill, he decided to add a portrait of communist revolutionary Vladimir Lenin to the mural. Well, that tore it. So he also painted a panel that the family felt was unflattering, portrait of his father, of John D. Rockefeller Jr. You had, Lenin and Rockefeller drinking martinis with a harlot and other things not too appealing to the family. So he could erase it and solve the problem, they asked him. And of course, no way was he going to do that. So that was it. That's how that story ended. Very colorful. Very, very colorful. So Frida Kahlo. I know there's some Kahlophiles out there, and she's fascinating. And right, if you don't know about her, Mexican painter known for her many portraits, self-portraits, and works inspired by the nature and artifacts of Mexico, inspired by the popular culture, employed a naive folk art style to explore questions of identity and post-colonialism, gender, class, and race in Mexican society. Her paintings often had strong autobiographical elements, and they mixed realism with fantasy. And in addition to belonging to the post-revolutionary Mexicayotl movement, which sought to define a Mexican identity, she's been described as a surrealist or magical realist, and known for painting, especially about her experience of chronic pain. Here were a few quotes from her. Feet, what do I need you for when I have wings to fly? I paint flowers so they will not die. They thought I was a surrealist, but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality. The most important part of the body is the brain. Of my face, I like the eyebrows and eyes. It is terrifying to see the rich having parties day and night while thousands and thousands of people are dying of hunger. I leave you my portrait so that you will have my presence all the days and nights that I am away from you. There's a rich history, of course, of music, Mexican music and beyond, Mexican-influenced Mexican-American. I happen to have a soft spot for the ranchera style of music that Pedro Infante was probably one of the great emblematic singers of, the biggest ranchera star of them all. He took off where his good friend Jorge Negrete left off, and he dominated film and song. He was an actor and a singer, and an incredible presence in a way no artist in the United States or Mexico ever has before, during and since his career. His hits are too numerous to mention. So, as this piece points out, they'll point out, here is the multiple genres he popularized: the bolero, the comedy song, the drunk song, the weeping song, and many more. Only Javier Solis could pull off a charro costume and a tuxedo as comfortably as Infante. So if you don't know his music, check out some of his ranchero music on Spotify or wherever you listen. How about Carlos Santana, Jalisco-born famous Mexican, eponymous and wildly successful rock come Latin American jazz band Santana. He was signed in '69, performed at Woodstock, and released first album in 1970 that he's so well known since outside of the smaller sphere of hardcore fans for a number of songs. So I didn't actually know about him and his Mexican background. But apropos of music and the Mayan culture, which we're coming to with some other poems, is a poem here, Chalacoco, Mexico, back in February of 2008. Los Trovadores, my poem, The Troubadours. 5. Mayan men with flashing smiles, wide mustaches, and even wider sombreros, buttoned in silver, and guitars the size of sea turtles, caress the air and our ears with their soulful troubadour songs. Los Trovadores. I was talking with a good friend of mine who helps out so often with the audio and other things around these programs, Grant Peterson, and we were talking about the expats. So you had the Lost Generation artist Monkey in Paris in the 30s and so on. And actually, I didn't realize how Mexico City was a Paris of its kind in the 20s for writers of different kinds and other people. And so I dialed up something from Berkeley, California, from the school, review of Latin American studies that they had done about radicals, revolutionaries, and exiles, Mexico City in the 20s, and found this. In the interwar era, cities across the Americas became hubs in transnational networks that linked radicals and revolutionaries of all kinds, anarchists, wobblies, socialists, communists, Garveyites, political exiles, and vanguard intellectuals. While there were a number of these urban hubs, New York, Tampa, New Orleans, and Havana all played a role, the largest by far was Mexico City. Particular attention has been paid to the U.S. artists, writers, folklorists, and intellectuals captured in some ways by Mexico City. Some examples include the silver pioneer and jewelry designer William Spratling, Anita Brenner, and Frances Tour, two American women who mingled with and wrote about the artist, and radical political practitioners of the 20s Mexican artist Renaissance. Tina Modotti, the Italian-American photographer, who mixed with the radical left, fell in love with one of the exiles, the handsome Cuban athlete, student leader, revolutionary Julio Antonio Mella, and on. Very interesting. And including, at some points, with the Beat generation, William Burroughs, Jack Kerouac, and Allen Ginsberg, and political refugees who fled Mexico during the McCarthyite period of the late 40s and 50s, who found safety in Mexico City and towns like Cuernavaca. Very interesting. There was a piece that D.H. Lawrence wrote. He was one of those people in the 1927 Mornings in Mexico. I got some kind of a travel piece. I wanted to read that, but I'd love to go on because in the interest of time and other things I'd like us to get to, maybe another time we'll get to him. You'd be surprised to know one of the most famous Mexican actors was Anthony Quinn. I know we mentioned him in the Greek program at the end of the film, Remember the Greek, and he played an amazing Greek, and the Greeks thought he was as Greek as they were, but in his stylization. Mexican. Dolores Del Rio, Ricardo Montalban, and Cantinflas, and others. So there's an interesting history of Mexican and then Mexican-American actors like Olmos. But I'd like to sort of leap along to poets, one in particular, one of the great ones, certainly the greatest of Mexico, Octavio Paz, and who crafted the poetic portrait of Mexico's soul. This is from Culture Trip. He is remembered for his concern for politics, anthropology and Mexican society, and is considered one of the most important writers of the 20th century, not just in Latin America. He initially studied law at university, but he was obsessed by poetry and especially influenced by the symbolists and romantics of the time, and fascinated by reading The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. So that led him to be interested in the relation between modern poetry and modern society. He won the Nobel Prize in 1990 for, quote, impassioned writing with wide horizons, characterized by sensuous intelligence and humanistic integrity. Well, after the social concern of his first poems, he became more interested in existential topics, and his poetry began to evoke themes of solitude and isolation. And I just wanted to pull out from his acclaimed book, The Labyrinth of Solitude. Just need a sip of water. This quote: "All of us at some moment have had a vision of our existence as something unique, untransferable, and very precious. This revelation almost always takes place during adolescence. Self-discovery is about all the realization that we are alone. It is the opening of an impalpable, transparent wall, that of our consciousness, between the world and ourselves. It is true that we sense our aloneness almost as soon as we are born, but children and adults can transcend their solitude and forget themselves in games or work. The adolescent, however, vacillates between infancy and youth, halting for a moment before the infinite richness of the world. He is astonished at the fact of his being, and this astonishment leads to reflection. As he leans over the river of consciousness, he asks himself if the face that appears there, disfigured by the water, is his own. The singularity of his being, which is pure sensation in children, becomes a problem and a question. Much the same thing happens to nations and peoples at a certain critical moment in their development. They ask themselves, what are we, and how can we fulfill our obligations to ourselves as we are? The answers we give to these questions are often belied by history, perhaps because what is called the, quote, genius of a people is only a set of reactions to a given stimulus. The answers differ in different situations, and the national character, which was thought to be immutable, changes with them." So, on to the Mayan, the Costa Maya, the Mayan civilization. Just as a brief footnote into this, was a Mesoamerican civilization, and it was absolutely advanced in art, architecture, mathematics, calendar, and astronomics. It was incredible, and it encompassed a tremendous area: southeastern Mexico, all of Guatemala and Belize today, and western portions of Honduras and El Salvador, and the peninsula where I spent time, and is where I wanted to focus in a moment. But the overarching term is really a modern collective term that refers to the peoples of the region, but it was not used by indigenous populations because there was never a common sense of identity or political unity. Very distinct populations. There are 6 million Mayans today, approximately speaking over 28 Mayan languages, and they reside in nearly the same area as their ancestors. They believed the earth had the form of a giant turtle that floated on an endless ocean, and that the sky was held up by 4 mighty gods called Bacabs. The sky was made up of 13 levels, and those who were sacrificed or died in battle went to one of the top levels, and those who died of natural causes went to Xibalba, the shadowy underworld, which had 9. They had many gods. I looked up a list of them, and it's very long, from Akan, the god of wine and intoxication, to Muzenkab, god of bees and honey, Awilix, the goddess of the moon, queen of the night, Balham, the jaguar god of the underworld, and on and on. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. So other things to tell you about, I think, just best by stepping into poems that allow us to lean back and take in the virtual warmth, sunshine, waves, air, clouds, seascapes of the beautiful Yucatan and Costa Maya. So, 4.5 miles, cerca tarde. A plump brown Mayan, oiled by the turquoise ocean, emerges from the shallows with a white orb, an opaque ball of ice he uses to cool the surrounding bathwater. Nearby, the jaws of boats tug at anchor lines like gently hooked fish, and a loose shirt of red flag flaps softly in the shoreward-leaning breeze. Today's palette. For the sky, azul celeste. The clouds, tiza y lavanda. For the low horizon, apizarrado. The deep sea, indigo. The shallows, verde veneciano. And for the sand, trigo termesino. Azure, chalk and lavender, slate-colored, Venetian green, summer wheat. La carretilla, the wheelbarrow. A poppy red wheelbarrow brimming with pale green coconuts. De madrugada, early in the morning. A stripe of zinc oxide over indigo. The evening's entertainment. The sunset sea is a Roman candle, sending forth from its verdigris core, from its foaming cone, endless plumes of luminous lime, zinc, and magenta, and last and best, before the sun sinks away, an immense plume of mercury. Then all goes dark, for a time, until a molten moon cannons up over the horizon, showering gold in its wake, and continues the show. El transatlantico, the ocean liner. The passing liner is a fiesta of lights, an over-candled birthday cake. You can't hear the singing this far off, but you're sure it's one hell of a party. Sin sal, without salt. You enter the hot shower at that tile-cool time of day. Clear, cleansing water washes away the salt of the day's sea and air, slips over your body like a second skin, warms you through like liquid sun after the sun has set, and before fresh clothes are put on and fruit drinks are poured and lanterns are lit for dinner. Serenade in the night. The slender pair of star-sheathed palms move to the rhythms of Mexican guitars, caressed by mocha-faced men, trioed by the thatch-roof bar. Their music and voices flow over us, flow over the shore, all their dulce de leche sounds swallowed eventually in the deep ear of the dark sea. La yema. The pale blue egg of day cracks, releasing the dark and a deep yellow yolk of moon. Esto sol, this sun. The sun is a curious thing. It frosts the ocean's forehead and bleaches plaster walls, yet bakes rooftops and browns men's bodies. This sun has curious powers. While opening birds' mouths and flowers' eyes, it purses the dark and lowers the shade. The more it reveals of the earth, the more it conceals of the moon. This sun, this curious sun. Charcos, puddles. We splash our feet in warm puddles of sun. Almendro. Broad, dense, and moss-colored, the leaves of the sun-roasted almond tree offer a cool refuge from the unrelenting afternoon. except for the ember-red leaves that have caught fire and, soon to crinkle and fall, hang down at intervals from the lush branches like so many paper lanterns glowing for an evening fiesta. Oceano, ocean. A silhouette of boat floats on a glimmering sea of noonday stars, black on white, iron on silver, wood on glass, with shapes of men plucking cool fish into the warm air like flowers from their beds. Well, wherever I go, I am often, as you know, by a coast by now, if you know, and I am an inveterate beachcomber, and I'm always looking for things and finding amazing things, and if not being able to bring them with me, at least making an image of them or a mental note. So this was a poem I wrote in honor of Joseph Cornell, great inspiration for me, back in February in the Yucatan on Punta Bete, where I mentioned that lovely little hotel I used to stay. Found washed up on an ocean walk. 2 green coconuts, a wine cork, a wooden leg, a skate egg, an empty sea turtle shell, a Havana cigar band, a false mustache, a blue rubber ball, a broken parasol. That was a day of finds. There were many, including all the beautiful shells. I collect beautiful shells and beautiful stones, interesting shells and stones. This was another time there, beachcombing, opening the inside. I soothe 2 fingers into your shell, scented with sea, touching inside that secret smooth place like warm, worn marble, the shell that holds your mystery inside, now yielding itself up to my discovering fingers. Here as there and elsewhere I've traveled alongside oceans, I see things and they, as an animist, I see an aliveness in them, but I also sometimes see a figure. Often it could be an animal or some kind of creature, and there I often would see many different kinds of creatures, and there was one in particular that I would see year after year, at least for a couple of years before it disappeared. But it was beautiful old log, but it looked exactly to me like an old lion, right by the surf. So this poem came to me, El León Viejo. An old lion sips from the ocean, his mane tangled and briny, his blond body smooth and sinewy. He drinks for hours and hours, day and night. Whenever you pass, he's there, 4 paws outstretched, weathered head bowed, lapping, and neither looks up nor lashes his tail. This thirsty old lion. Another time I was in, not a forest exactly, but a grove of palms, and the sun hit them at a certain time, and the light was incredible, and this poem flew up inside me, calling to mind Henri Rousseau and the famous painting of the lion over the sleeping man. Rousseau revisited, for Henri Rousseau, a solitary beast in the heart of a sun-strewn jungle piked with palms, whose trunks are all tiger-striped, the violet-green air dense with silence, but no homme or hombre in its yellow jaws, just the memory of the way the world once entered Henri's eyes. Well, I was often being beautifully quiet and musing on the landscape, on nature, and that's why I would go every year to that place and that time and step out of my other life or other part of my life that was, very full, very busy, and this was a counter to that at that time. So, and again in the Yucatan in the winter of '98, in a Mexican shooting gallery, In this seaside arcade, flat tin ships replace sitting ducks. They move oh so slowly across a horizon line, one at a very long time. The scenery is simple: a bank of clouds, a board of water, a strip of sand, a morning sun. But there's no man to hand you a gun, and no gun, or any carnival music. Just the hurdy-gurdy melody of the waves. Well, the wildlife was always wonderful there, and the people's faces were marvelous. And I'll share with you this poem, La Senora. Coffee hair, mulberry eyes, rhubarb lips, chestnut skin, olive freckles, raspberry nipples, mango breasts, vine-ripened beauty. The weather was also so prominent and led to many, many, many poems. I'll just give you maybe one or two, since we're coming toward the latter part of our time now, today, here. Chiaroscuro. Rain clouds shroud slowly out like a lead awning as I stride down the beach for a late day swim. The ocean is empty. The air is still. The wind suspended, and suddenly much cooler. I slip off my clothes and enter the bath-warm water where the light on the surface and on my wet skin is cinematic, liquid. I look up from the warm green water bath at the ashen purple dark overhang, intrigued by the mood of brooding above and suspension below. In a while I wade out into the even cooler air, wrap my waist in a towel and pull on my shirt. In moments the rain begins to spatter down, all big drops, as I quick-step my barefoot way back, under quenching palms, to our dry lamplit room, where you lie wrapped and happy in a blue plaid blanket. I'd love to share Lawrence Ferlinghetti's poem, Beatitudes Visuales Mexicanas. These were moments of a kind that he called out back in 75. Autobus and Paseo de la Reforma with destination signs Bellas Artes Insurgentes. Exactamente. Just what's needed. Insurgent arts. Poesia insurgente. This is not it. Passing through Puebla late Sunday afternoon, a band concert in a plaza next to a Ferris wheel. I've passed through many places like this. I've seen the toy trains in many amusement parks. When you've seen them all, you've seen one. A boy and 3 burros run across a stubble field away from the White Mountain. He holds a stick. There is no other way. As the bus turns and turns down the winding hill, moon swings wildly from side to side. It has too many pathetic phalluses written about it to stand still for one more. I'm taking this trip from Mexico City to the Gulf of Mexico and back without any bag or person, only what I can carry in my pockets. The need for baggage is a form of insecurity. 2 hours in this town and I feel I might live forever. Foreign places affect me that way. The tall church tower tolls its antique sign, pray. Brown men in white palmetto cowboy hats stand above the fountains in groups of 3 or 4, their voices lost to the hollow-sounding birds. Along a sunlit white stone balustrade, student lovers are studying each other. Novios, awaiting the day. The sun beats down hot and melts not the mountain. On the bus again to Veracruz, dropping down fast to flat coast. A tropical feeling, suddenly coffee plantation and palms, everything small, except the landscape. Horses the size of burros, small black avocados, small strong men with machetes. Each still saying to himself, Mi lamo yo. So, last few for us, last few poems before we wind out. Reading in the rain. Our reader reclines under a warm wool blanket with a good book on a broad bed in a dry room by the ocean's edge, while through half-open windows, rain falls all along a dark coast, out across an unlit ocean, falls for miles through the black, blustering, starless sky, down to over-sodden sand, comforting our lone reader under his blanket, in his watertight room, between the lines and dry leaves of his lamplit book. It was a poem from Tulum. Eterno, eternal. An old boat floating, an old pelican fishing, an old man wishing on the endless day and nightless waves. Centuries of winters. I thought that was rather appropriate in a way to include for where we are in the world right now. On a note of hopefulness, centuries of winters, centuries of wars, centuries of civilizations and conquistadores have not stopped the tides from falling or the moon from rising, the beating of birds' wings or women's hearts, the heat of the day, the absolute silence of the stars. Next to last, beber del silencio, drinking the stillness. I drink the stillness like a glass of nirvana poured from some deep and secret cellar of the universe, saved for rare occasions such as this. My eyes closed to savor the silent bliss it sends through my soul and skin. And last for now, todo bien. Today, you take a siesta in the shade, surrounded by a sun-glazed sea. Your thoughts drift on the endless waves, on the passing clouds. Like shells, your ears catch the music of the surf and the palms rustling like loose pages in the wind. You've forgotten the date and indefinitely the hour. Todo bien. Muchas gracias. Thank you again so much for listening in, for feeling in, and being part of this buen viaje. And thanks to each of you helping to support these weekly programs and my poetic arts with your donations of all kinds and your enthusiasms. Every word of thought and heart you send me is so welcome, and every contribution, which you can make by PayPal or Venmo or directly through my site, as are invitations to have me as an artist in residence to create new work for a month or a season ahead, or sponsor part of an arising art project. I also invite your thoughts and questions. Feel free to send me yours around this or any earlier broadcast. What struck you? Spoke to your heart, mind, or spirit? I'd like to know, and I'd like to answer them in a special program in January. Just email me at colin@thepoetorialist.com. Meanwhile, replays for all the programs are playable and shareable online. I invite you to lean in next week or soon again. Until then, dear listeners, good days ahead. Days of buena suerte y buenos sueños. And good spirits. Saludos y cuídate.